Alright, what's up guys? Travis with TCustomz Productionz, TCustomz.com. Today's video topic is another video I'm shooting based off of your consistent emails, comments I've received in the YouTube videos on tips for mixing. In the past, over the years, I've included some different miscellaneous tips in some of my beat breakdown videos, some random tips here and there. But just based off the sheer request that I continually get, I want to put together some videos to help you with your mixing, and I want to start this off by just today giving you a general overview of my 10 fundamental tips for a better beat mix. First off, this is not meant to be any comprehensive list. These are 10 tips that I think have been very valuable to me and have helped me to improve my mixes over the years. I think they can be helpful to you as well, and some of these tips are also going to translate into, say, your vocal mixes or song mixes. Even though I'm kind of focusing this on mixing an instrumental, just know that you can take these tips also and apply them to your vocal song mixes. So my number one tip is quality sounds. You have to start with a good foundation of sounds in order to set yourself up for a good mix. If you're trying to use a lot of stock or cheesy sounds or thin sounds, you can do all the kind of processing and mixing and stuff that you want, but you're still not going to get the potential quality that you could if you had started with a better quality sound. At the end of the day, if you're not starting with a good quality foundation of sound, whether it be drum selection, samples, other instrumentation, synthesizers, pianos, it's going to be tough when you go to polish and mix that beat. Number two, studio monitor. So the idea with a studio monitor versus just using a laptop speaker or some other system to primarily mix your tracking is that the studio monitor hopefully has a more flat or natural sound and it gives you a more true representation of what your mix really sounds like. On many systems, whether it be on certain headphones or other stereo systems, they'll have certain enhancements or certain equalizers. That's why you go in your car and maybe your aftermarket CD player has different EQ settings on it. And so the studio monitor should give you that close to near representation of what your mix actually sounds like and give you the best shot of that translating onto all the other systems out and actually sounding good on those particular devices. You know, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you what studio monitors to buy because there's a wide range of them. Some of them are on the super low end, some of them go up. Take advantage of reviews and forums that are out there readily available to figure out what can work best for you and your budget and make the best use of what you have. Over time, as you improve and you get maybe more of a budget, you may want to upgrade to a higher end studio monitor. As you can probably see behind me, I'm actually using a KRK Rocket. And this is actually the 5. It's their lower model, their smallest monitor that they make in this series. And ideally for the types of tracks that I make, I would want at least a Rocket 6 or something bigger just because it has a certain frequency response range that gets in the lower sub-bass range. And that's one thing to consider when you're looking at your studio monitor is the frequency range. But you have to remember there's a lot of different variables with the studio setup. It's not just the monitors, it's also the atmosphere. I also have a set of the Rocket 8s, which is on the higher end of the same series. And what I noticed with that particular monitor in my room is that the bass was just overpowering in this space. But at the end of the day, you just want a studio monitor that's gonna give you as close to a true representation of that mix as possible. Tip number 3 is multiple references, and I've talked about this before as well. Even though you may do your primary mixing, say, on your studio monitors, you would still, in most cases, want to have a few alternate references for your mix. Now, you might get to the point where you know your monitor is 100%, you know your room, you know how it sounds, you know how all the mix and all the elements are coming through in your system through your main monitors, and you don't need an additional reference because you've been doing it long enough, your ears are trained, and that's fine. But it also wouldn't hurt to take that mix and put it, say, on your laptop and see how it's coming through in a system that doesn't have as much low end, or on your phone. Also having a set of headphones that you can reference to. I really like these Sennheiser HD280 Pro. I've been using them for a while. I actually have 2 sets of them. They have a really great frequency response range for the price point. And then in addition to headphones, having, say, a reference in your car and being able to hear that mix in your car environment. It was interesting, I just watched a recent interview from an established mixing engineer that was talking about something special about listening to a mix in your car that you really don't get in any other atmosphere. And I thought that was kind of interesting. But one of the reasons I go out to my car too is because just to double check my lower register in those sub-bass frequencies, that I get a pretty good representation on here, but that just gives me an additional reference on that low end in that particular setup. If you mix on your studio monitors and you check it on your laptop or check it in your car and it's totally drastically different than what you heard there, then you're definitely going to double check that. Hopefully you mix it on your monitors, check in your headphones, it sounds about the same, and you go out to your car and you're kind of getting the same type of representation. And it's ideally what you want is to have pretty much a consistent representation of your mix throughout multiple devices. Okay, so tip number 4 is gain staging. Basically, all this means is getting your relative levels right to make sure that you have enough headroom, that there's not any kind of clipping or any unwanted distortion, and basically setting yourself up for, say, a finalization of your final compression or your final master. There are some really great to-the-point tutorials. You can probably just Google search on gain staging. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, it's a very simple principle, but also very, very important. Okay, so tip number 5 is EQ, and in particular, just a simple high-pass filter. If you're starting with good quality sounds from the beginning, you may not have to do a lot of crazy EQing and further manipulation of your sounds. But one thing that I've found very consistent and very common in a lot of aspiring beat makers' mixes is a lot of muddiness. And a lot of muddiness is introduced in that mid-frequency range when there's no real cleanup work or cutoff on those sounds that are being used. For instance, a lot of my tracks, if I'm working on a sample-based beat and I want to bring in a lead synth for the hook, I know in many cases for a lead synth that I may just want some of the higher frequencies to come through, even though that particular synth may take up the whole frequency spectrum down to 100 hertz all the way up. Maybe I only need that to come in 800 hertz or 1000 hertz and above, and so if I don't roll off the excess that's not necessary there, it's just going to add another element that may conflict with, let's say, my bass line, or maybe a mid-frequency instrument that I have there, or my kick drum. And so as you stack more and more of these sounds in your project is where it becomes more imperative that you take this into consideration. But as I add new instruments or samples or whatever, I've just got a habit of dragging over either a high-pass filter, a single-band EQ, or a multi-band EQ to that track, whether I use it or not, because that's something that can very easily be fixed, but if it's not handled in the appropriate way, it can really muddy up your mixes. Number 6 is give your ears a break. Let your ears rest, especially on some of the bigger projects that you're working on. If you're working on a track that has multiple layers of instruments, it has multiple percussion and drum sounds, the more you work on that, if you're in the zone and working on a mix for hours, after a while you may start getting ear fatigue and you may not be hearing your mixes as you think you are. I know for me that I seem to get ear fatigue rather quickly actually, so if I'm working on mixing a track, I may just work on it for 10 or 15, 20 minutes and then just set it aside and come back to it later. For instance, if I'm mixing one of my beats, I may start mixing my kick and my snare drum, and then maybe bring in my primary sample or whatever the main instrument is, whether it be a piano or strings or pad. Get those 3 elements sounding right. Maybe introduce one of my percussive tracks or bass line, set it aside, maybe come back to it an hour, 2 hours later and really compare, listen to it over again, kind of keep myself in check to make sure that I'm not getting ear fatigue. I'd much rather come back to it with fresh ears and get a true representation of what that track sounds like than to kind of beat your eardrums for hours and hours, come back, listen to your final mix the next day and realize that it was not what you intended it to be. So tip number 7 is rely on your ears. So what I mean by this is don't necessarily get caught up in just the visual representation of the meters and everything that's going on your screen. Obviously, your level meters, the meters on your various plugins, the visual representation of your track is going to help you. It's going to help assist you, but also don't solely rely on the visual representation of that. Use these things that you have on the side of your head to really be the final say, because at the end of the day, really what matters is how the track ultimately sounds. So tip number 8 for a better instrumental mix is panning. So this is just an additional element like I talked about for EQ to kind of make room for certain elements and make sure they're not overbearing other instruments that you want to kind of shine through the mix. Panning is another way to take advantage of the stereo field. Keep in mind that everything doesn't have to be centered straight down the middle. In many cases, you're going to want to have certain things going to the left or to the right. Panning automation that can make for some really interesting things that I use a lot in my mixes. In many cases, this will make your mix sound a lot wider. It can help to form pockets for whatever your MC or vocalists are going to be recording over your beats. We have access to this big stereo field and you just want to make sure that you're taking advantage of it to get the best quality mix that you can. Tip number 9 is mix at low level starting out and then gradually increase the overall volume. This kind of ties in a little bit with when I was talking about ear fatigue and giving your ears a rest. What happens is if you have your monitor volume turned all the way up or really loud and you're trying to mix at that loud level, even though all your meters are right as far as your gain staging, what happens is your eardrums almost kind of become defensive as they start to absorb more loud sounds. And so if you have your mix cranked up really loud for an extended period of time, you're not really going to get that true representation of what the mix is sounding like. You may mix really loud and then an hour later come back to it and listen to it at the same level or even at a more moderate volume, and it might sound totally different than what you were hearing at that loud level. So basically, if you can get it sounding right at that low level, everything sounds good there, and you bring it up to a moderate level, everything sounds good there, then you crank it up and everything's good there. That approach will give you a lot better results than starting at a mid or high level volume and then trying to work back down trying to listen to it at a low level. Tip number 10 is listen and absorb to top-notch, high-quality music on a regular basis. I've mentioned this in a lot of videos in the past. I talked about this. I'm going to mention it again in this video because I think it's very important, especially starting out when you're trying to train your ears for a certain standard of quality. If you're listening to really good, high-quality mixes over periods of time, every day, every week, over months and years, you'll inherently raise your standard for what your mixes should sound like. You may have a certain preference in the sound that you're trying to achieve, and so you may want to listen to a certain style of, say, hip-hop or a certain style of pop or R&B. You got a project that you're mixing and you're going for a certain style, put a compilation of industry tracks together that may be similar to the style that you're trying to achieve, or just are quality mixes in general, and ideally that will inherently raise the bar for the level of mixes that you'll be turning out. And I know that was already the top 10, but I want to go ahead and throw in an 11th as a bonus, and that is to study established mixing engineers. Now, if you go online and you do a search, you'll find a lot of great interviews, you'll find some great tutorials from people. I mean, just a couple resources to throw out to you that you might want to check out if you haven't. Number one would be Pensada's place. He gives out a lot of really great tips himself, and then he also interviews a lot of established producers, engineers, and people in the industry. There's really a lot of invaluable information you can gather from these little 30-minute interviews here and there. And also a channel that I recently got turned on to, which has been around for a while, and some of you may know this as well, is Recording Revolution. Graham does a lot of really great videos and work over there, and basically his entire channel is dedicated to those type of videos and content. So those are two I definitely recommend checking out. But these are basically my tips, guys. These are not, again, a comprehensive list, but take from it what you will. Hopefully these have helped you in some way. Some of it might just be re-emphasis. Hopefully you've got at least a couple new tips that you can take away from this video. If this video was helpful, let me know. Give me a thumbs up, drop a comment below. There will also be a link down there for high quality drum samples and sound kits, mixing and mastering, whether you need your song or instrumental mix. Again, my links will be in the description. If you need to contact me through social media, feel free to reach out. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.